Ladies and gentlemen, it's a big day on Catholic School Matters, because I think we're going on a different platform, right? Well, first, let me introduce my guest. He is Catholic education's most interesting man, Rob Birdsell. Rob.
Well, Tim, if I could introduce, welcome to the next class. I'm Rob Birdsell with my co-host, Tim ILLE.
I love the fact that, listeners, this is what you need to know. When we get on, he's listening to one of my podcasts, and Rob has gone through the list of guests that I've had. Meanwhile, I don't even know the name of your podcast. That's how much prep work. So much prep.
You were taught by the Jesuits. Didn't they teach you to do your homework, man?
Yeah. Yeah. They did try to teach me that. But also fake it till you make it, right? So here I am. So this is going to run on your channel, right, Rob?
Yeah, this is first, to my knowledge, we're doing a dual podcast. So yes. You're doing the podcast, I'm doing the podcast. We're going to put it out there so more people can hear it. But I've listened to your podcast, and I hope that my listeners that haven't can turn to Catholic School Matters and learn. And your listeners that haven't heard of the next class can have a new podcast around education.
I'm just going to edit it in such a way that I sound smarter on my version than yours. Okay.
You're going to have to spend a lot of time, Tim.
Yep. I actually do. That's really the only thing I do when I go through. I take out the ums and the duh. Every once in a while, I'll cut something out when a joke doesn't land, but I don't really do the major editing, like take a section out, or I certainly don't move things around, because I like to have kind of an authentic conversation. And sure. That's the way an authentic conversation sounds. I know most people aren't listening to a podcast. They aren't like sitting down and giving it their 100% focus, right? They're doing something else. They're gardening, walking the dog, something else. And it's kind of in the, I don't know, wouldn't you say that? It's like a 50% maybe attention?
I don't know about 50, but yeah, when I'm walking the dog, doing dishes, it's not you're not sitting there taking notes necessarily.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's, and then I oftentimes, I don't know about you, but oftentimes people will ask, they'll say, do you have a list of questions you're going to ask? Do you get that a lot? I always say, no, I don't know. I don't know what to talk about today. I don't know what we're going to talk about. I told you we're going to talk about what are you up to this year? And I'm going to talk about what I'm up to this year, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, I generally send a couple prompts, but I premise it by saying, we don't want this to be an interview. We want it to be a conversation.
Right.
And when you have questions, it becomes too much of an interview. So I'll do more prompts. Like, here are 3 themes I'd like to dig into.
That's great. Maybe I should start doing that.
Yeah, a couple themes just to, so they have some sense.
Wait, let me write that down.
While you're writing that down, here's another fun one you should do. So I was at Lone Rock, which you've been to in April, with a bunch of the ILLE people and some aspiring leaders. And I was having a conversation with John Ray, who is the turnaround president of Modern Day Catholic in Chula Vista. And we had 8 aspiring leaders, and we're going to talk about things that we saw in great leaders, similar to your conversation you had with Elizabeth a couple weeks ago, or I guess in May. And John and I were going to have this talk, and it just came to me spur of the moment. I said, John, we're going to do a live podcast. And he's like, whoa, wait, I've never done a podcast. I'm like, perfect. He's like, what do we do? So we just talk. And it was pretty cool. So we had 8 people listening. John and I gave the talk. I recorded it. And then we got questions from the audience.
Yeah.
And it was really engaging. And John thought it was so much fun. He's like, oh, I'm a podcaster now. I'm like, whoa, hold on. Settle down, Tiger. You're a guest.
Yeah, the live podcast. I mean, I am doing one on Saturday with the Jesuit who wrote the book on the nativity phenomena. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Jack Podziarlo or something.
Yeah.
So he lives in Rochester, so I'm just going to drive up there.
But are you going to have an audience?
No.
But you're going to stream it live?
No. I'm going to record a live conversation, so the 2 of us are going to be in the same room. That's what I call a live podcast. So then I'll edit it and so forth. Okay. Let's make sure for my listeners we introduce you, and then we can introduce you. You are formerly Cristo Rey, I think, is where you first started making your mark, right? No. Why don't you introduce yourself then? You're giving me a look.
I, I would hope that people would say that I made my mark in the classroom. That's where it all began.
That's great.
And it's where I hope to end my career. No, I taught for 5 years. I started at Marquette University High School, which I think I'm probably the guest that you've known longest in your 8 seasons. Is there anyone that known longer than me?
No, there's people. No.
What?
Yeah, I had some guys on from high school. I had some guys on that I knew when I was in high school. So yeah, we got you.
Okay.
Did you teach Bill Daly when you were at Marquette?
I did.
Yeah. So Bill is my he was on before and he's my guest. We're recording this. It's next Monday. So what's the date on that? August 28th would be the podcast with Bill, because they've expanded to a second campus down there in San Antonio. So
he's great. He was at Market High. I'm pretty sure I taught him. I knew his brother was in my class, and I
bet he was a real punk, right?
I think he was pretty smart, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
Well,
so that doesn't mean he's not a punk, right? But yeah.
Yeah. But I along with Father Winzenberg, started Market High's Alumni Service Corps, which is in its 30th year now.
Okay.
Pretty cool. A lot of Jesuit high schools have these. In this teacher shortage, I recommend every high school look at doing one of these. Bring some alumni back. They don't have to teach, but they can prefect and coach, and bring the energy the young scholastics had at Creighton Prep when you were there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Went out to Loyola. I had a couple great years there, Market High. But you're right. Cristo Rey was really where I was fortunate enough to learn a ton and carry Father Foley's bags for a number of years. And Father Dennis Holtschneider, who was another guest you had, he had a great line. We were tenants of DePaul University. So we had our office downtown DePaul on their campus. He's very proud that the Vincentians hosted Cristo Rey, not the Jesuits. And Father Dennis, when I went in to say that this would be my last year, and Father Foley always came with me to thank him for giving us office space. And he said, Rob, you're really a Vincentian. You're not a Jesuit. I'm like, well, I'm neither, but what do you mean? And he said, well, in our founding papers and their founding articles, whatever, St. Vincent de Paul said, if you ever come across a Jesuit, carry his bags. And he said, Rob, you've been carrying John Foley's bags for 5, 6, 7 years. You're a Vincentian. Father Foley didn't think that was very funny.
And that was which school? Which school in Chicago? There more than one?
So that was the network office.
Oh, the network office.
So I was Elizabeth's predecessor.
Okay.
And actually hired her, brought her from Tucson. She was my chief academic officer. And I was CEO of the national office.
Weren't you in one of the schools before that?
No, I see where you're going. Correct. Originally, we were across the street from the original school in Pilsen.
Okay.
Sort of a little ramshackle 2-flat. And when BJ Caston hired me, he said, your first job is to get out of that apartment and get into an office downtown. Okay. He thought there's too much affinity with the original school. And he wanted the network to stand on its own and support all the schools, not just, show off the original school.
Okay. So you went from CEO of Cristo Rey to what was your next stop?
So I was then brought in to be CEO of the Accelerate Institute. It's a leadership program at Kellogg at Northwestern University. It was one of the only multi-sector leadership programs. So we had charter schools, district schools, Lutheran schools, Catholic schools, and try to be agnostic to the model and focus on leadership and support all schools. So it was a pretty cool gig. And then from there started the Drexel Fund with John Erickson, which is now at over 80 million and 150 schools or so they've supported. And I would argue a lot of the school choice legislation that you and Christine were talking about, Christine Healy, I would argue is because of the Drexels showing if you can have a great school on a voucher in Ohio, you should get it in Iowa, and then you should get it in Nevada, and you can do that. And so Drexel's done some great work. And then 7 years ago, I was recruited to start Amerigo Education, where I'm still at, and that's where ILLE is out of. And we partner with Catholic schools to run their international student programs. So we'll have over 1,000 kids at 15 of our partner schools. And some we do boarding, some homestay. But it's a remarkable program. Up at Carmel Catholic last week, the principal was talking about how 3 students from 3 different countries went on Kairos.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and one of them was Chinese, had never heard of Jesus prior to going to Carmel, and just talked about how over a 4-year, he wasn't being proselytized, he didn't convert, but he now knew of our faith and had a really powerful experience going on Kairos. So that's pretty cool. A kid from China going on Kairos in Chicago.
And then you also dabble in Catholic Virtual now.
So I'm the president of Catholic Virtual.
Yeah.
And also run the Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship and Education, ILLE, which you have been engaged with, and we're excited to be launching a new seminar in March. So if any of your listeners are current leaders or aspiring leaders and they'd like to learn more, they could contact me about our new seminar model. We're having the first cohort in March. We have 12 people already signed up, and we'll close it at 24.
All right. So the ILLE, and I'm sorry, what do you call in the institute in the spring?
It's the new cohort. So we're launching a new cohort of leaders.
Okay.
And they'll do a 3-seminar 2-year program.
I didn't know if you were called the seminar program something different. So that's why.
Just the ILLE seminars.
Okay. So ILLE seminars, and it's modeled on the Aspen Pahara kind of model, which is seminars, great thinkers. What else can you say about that? Because you've been through the process.
Right. No, I was fortunate to have gone through the Aspen Pahara Fellowship and just thought we need this for Catholic school leaders. It's such a transformative experience. A number of Catholic people you've had on, Kevin Baxter has done it. John Erickson at Drexel has done it. But I thought we needed it at the school level. And it's building off actually the Aspen Institute's 70-year-old seminar model, which is text-based. So we're using some of their text, but then my colleague Kent Hickey and I have been looking at a number of Catholic texts. So people like Mary Oliver, St. Teresa of Avila, James Finley's podcast on St. Teresa of Avila will be one of the texts we'll use, even though it's a podcast, but modern text. And we'll use that text to dig into leadership. And excited that you'll be joining us in October, Tim, to test the new model.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, there's kind of a gap between sort of university education and professional development. And then university education, so many of our superintendents and school leaders were educated in secular universities, or they're in programs that they don't really delve into spirituality and spiritual leadership. And then when you start looking at professional development programs around spiritual leadership, it's hard to find one that kind of crosses into that executive type role as opposed to just pastoral leadership in general.
No, you're right. And I think we've done, you and I were talking earlier, but I think we've done a lot of really good work around academics. We're differentiated instruction, assessments, curriculum. We've done great work there. We've also done a lot of good work around Boston College's new initiative on board development, on enrollment management, on fundraising. But we've sort of left out the spiritual CEO. And, I was telling you, I did a survey of 40 school leaders. Only one was getting spiritual direction, but 100% would like to be. Yeah. So as we put lay people in these, I don't think we've done a great job of supporting their faith formation and spiritual direction. And they're the CEO, they're the spiritual CEO of the school.
Well, I mean, when you're at a school, especially if you're in elementary school, you always have this tension about, are you part of this faith community or not? And if you're part of the faith community, so that you might go as a parishioner, well, now you're sitting in the pews and your boss is preaching to you, literally. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a little uncomfortable. And it's also uncomfortable to go to your boss for confession. That just brings up all sorts of conflicts of interest, right? If you're in my seat, kind of, we're working at Chancery, a lot of priests, but boy, it's hard to be able to identify somebody who can serve that role as a spiritual mentor or spiritual confidant. Because you work with them, and when you work with people, sometimes they let you down, Rob. And sometimes you have these different types of relationships. So Yeah, but it's great that you're raising that issue, and it's great that we're surfacing that because it is definitely a need. I had a conversation in the parking lot yesterday with somebody who works here in the Chancery, and just kind of casually said, and it was a priest, and casually said, I just said, "Hey, how you doing? I know it's a busy time for you right now. How you doing?" And he was just like, just trying to make it through day by day.
Hmm.
And he wasn't saying that as a platitude. Like, he had that look of weariness and fatigue, and because there's a lot going on in his sort of office, and I thought to myself, wow, we're really not doing well if the people that work here are not getting spiritually fed.
Wow, that's so interesting, Tim. And um, there's a yearning for it. There's a yearning for it, and I think ILLE is just a teeny little small program that can help. But and the other thing is, you and I both had the blessings of going to Jesuit schools, where the president, when we were there, was a Jesuit. They do 13 years of formation. Every
Yeah.
summer they do an 8-day silent retreat. They all have a spiritual director. They live in a spiritual community. They go to mass every day. And I would be willing to bet you uh, a beer at Lone Rock that the next president of Market High and the next president of Creighton Prep is probably going to be a layperson.
Yeah.
And that layperson isn't going to have had 13 years of formation. They aren't going to be doing an 8-day silent retreat. But we can't get them a spiritual director. We can support them in that role.
Right. All right. Let me introduce myself to your
Wait, wait.
listeners. The
No,
next
okay.
class.
The
All right.
next class. Welcome to the next class. My guest is Tim Uhl.
Yeah, I'm just this guy. I'm a gardener. I became a gardener this year, man. Love to spend time in my garden. Because here's the thing: in Buffalo, there's no deer. So in Montana, all the gardening I would do, the deer would just come and they would think, oh, it's a buffet. I can just eat these flowers. In Buffalo, no deer, so I can get flowers galore. So I got flowers
There's
all over
no
my front
deer.
yard.
No deer in Buffalo.
Well, nothing like what was in Montana. So, and we live on a fairly busy street, so you rarely see any deer on our street. And so we have ripped up most of the front yard and planted perennials, and we're into the pollination. I'm also a triathlete now,
Oh.
so
When was it? 2 weeks ago?
it's like 3 weeks ago, July 23rd, and I'm doing another one this weekend. So yeah.
Awesome.
And then I got 2 dogs. Spent a lot of time with my puppies.
What kind of dogs?
I have a Bouvier and an English sheepdog. They're nuts.
So
No,
we're
the sheepdog's nuts. But and then oh, there's yours. What we got there?
it's a golden doodle greyhound.
I was gonna say it's probably got a golden doodle. And everybody always thinks that Ulysses is a golden doodle when he gets his haircut, but I'm like, no, it's a Bouvier. Oh, and I'm also the superintendent of Buffalo Catholic Schools. Been there since so 2.5 years. Before that, I was in Montana. I have this podcast and newsletter, Catholic School Matters. I've been in conversations with thought leaders about Catholic education for some time. So it's my I don't know if it's a hobby, passion, but hobby shouldn't denigrate it. But my main job is leading the schools, leading the people. We're going to meet with principals tomorrow all day, kind of back to school, 2 weeks away from the start of school. So that's kind of a focus right now.
You're downplaying your podcast a bit. As you said, I did do my homework, and 8 seasons. That's pretty remarkable to
8 seasons.
and
Yeah, it's really something. In fact, I told this story again to Bill Daly. So I apologize, listeners. I'm going to say it again. When I was in Montana, I traveled a lot, and I listened to a lot of podcasts because you couldn't get radio, and my CDs got, this is before streaming music really took off. And I was listening to all these podcasts, and I was like, man, ultimately what a podcast is people listening in on a conversation. And and what happens is when you listen to a podcast long enough, you start to internalize kind of their values, their thinking, their approach to things. And so sometimes, you listen to a podcast long enough and you're like, I don't like this anymore. Like, I don't like this guy. I don't like this person. But I was thinking to myself, I know some pretty interesting people. And there really isn't anybody in the Catholic education space. No Catholic school kind of podcast. So I was driving home one night from Great Falls to Helena, late night. It's a beautiful drive, but at night it's a little harrowing because you're back and forth in a dark canyon. There's no, and you're worried about deer running across the road. But I was really gripped by this idea, and I came home and I just like sat down, grabbed a pad of paper, and started writing down names of people who would make for an interesting conversation. And I made a list of 25 people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill Daly was on that list. I told him this. And I thought, okay, I got something here. I got something because I can look. I know people from all different sort of rooms in the Catholic education mansion. I know somebody about development and somebody about finance and somebody about education and somebody about spirituality and so forth. And that's how I launched it. Like, I just know the people I know. And then it just became, I've tried some different things over the time, and I'm doing something different right now. So I want to tell you about this, Rob. I'm doing a series on controversies in Catholic education because I curate stuff, right? I curate articles, and sometimes they run in most of the time I just run the article in my newsletter and don't really comment on it or anything. And I was like, these things are kind of slipping by, and I don't think we're having enough conversations about this. So, and the other thing is that I don't like podcasts that necessarily have a purpose, like promoting a book or promoting a program or doing something like that. You can kind of see through that. This is why this person's on the podcast circuit, because they're promoting a movie or a book or something like that. I like just authentic conversations. So I've invited people. I've started this, and I give them 5 controversies that I collected over the last 12 months. And so those are our jumping off points. We don't like, the point is not to embarrass the school or the leader. The point is to say, this happened. What do you think about it? What would you differently? Have you ever faced something like this? How would you approach it? And so I had my first one last week. I have another one with Kevin Baxter this Friday. And then the following week, I have one with Greg Richmond. You mentioned he's part of our October group. So, and then, okay, so then the other piece of this, which is really cool. So I recorded the one last Friday with Dan McMahon, who's principal at DeMatha in DC. So it's a 50-minute audio file. So I sent that to someone else to listen to. And then I'm going to do a 10-minute reflection with her on our main podcast. So it's kind of meta, right? You're going to listen to it and you're going to be like, you're going to start having thoughts. And then my other guest is going to come on and go, hey, here's the thing. When I listened to this is what really stuck out.
I like that.
I know.
I like
it's
that.
Like, it could be really good, because that's oftentimes it's like you see a good movie or you see something and you want to talk about it to somebody, right? Well, this podcast, you're not necessarily, you don't know who else is listening, and it's asynchronous, and it's sort of like my experience this year when I was on the Peloton doing a lot of training. I was watching The Walking Dead, so I just binged it. Well, no one else is watching The Walking Dead this year, so I had nobody to talk to about it, right? Because they happened like the first season was like 11, 12 years ago. So it's not like I wanted to, I should have done this, but I wanted to start tweeting out, like, when someone died, R.I.P. Herschel, right? And people would be like, why is he doing R.I.P. Herschel? Well, then maybe somebody would have.
What could you do? Could you do a Q&A for, I don't know how you get it out there, but through your newsletter or something? If you listen to this podcast with so-and-so, and then send questions that myself and Kevin or whoever you're going to have would respond to.
Yeah.
Listener Q&A would be kind of cool too.
It would. I've never had much luck with that, though. I really haven't.
No?
Like, yeah.
You know who's done it well? Do you know the podcast Turning to the Mystics, James Finley?
No.
Out of Father Rohr's The Center for Action and Contemplation.
Yeah.
So Finley does like an hour lecture on a mystic, so Saint Teresa of Avila. And then he does what you're talking about, a discussion with his co-host. And then they go through a series on a mystic. And at the end, it's a listeners send in their questions, and he answers listener questions at the end of the series.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, Turning to the Mystics is a great one.
I mean, what I would be more prone to do, because it would just be easier, is I would just make up the questions, right? I'd say, okay, we got a listener question here from Lehigh, Pennsylvania. And, you know, and people would, that's actually because when I was in college, I went to St. Mary's in San Antonio, and I was the sports editor, and I had a whole column on reader questions, letters. It was called Letters to the Sports Editor. Very, very clever. And they were all made up, right? All the questions were made up. And I would never tell anyone that. I would just say, please send your questions to. I mean, occasionally I might get a question right, but people were always amazed. Like, how do you get, I mean, you're just like this little newspaper. How do you get like 10 questions every week? It's amazing. I'm like, I know there's a lot of people reading. It's great. Now I finally revealed my secret.
I know. Now your listeners are never going to believe any questions. If you ever do a Q&A, they're going to be like, I know what this is.
It's all a bunch of softball questions.
All right. So going through your list, you've had some great guests. I mean, so
yeah, who stands out there?
Okay. So one I was kind of blown away by because I hadn't heard this name in ages, but Neil Wilkinson.
Yeah, Neil.
He was at Market High when I started the Alumni Service Corps. Great guy. So I haven't kept up with him in ages. And what's he doing now?
So he's out in San Diego. The last time I had him on was about a year and a half ago, I think, because he had shared with me that he started getting Parkinson's. His father had died of Parkinson's, and so and we're friends on Facebook. I see him every time I go out to San Diego, and he so that was our conversation is really about sort of diminishment and that double diminishment of like his own dad. Died of Parkinson's, and now he has Parkinson's, and it's not genetic. Like they haven't found that that's something that passes on. It's just a weird coincidence. But yeah, he used to be Wisconsin Province. He transferred out there because he's Father Pepe. He speaks Spanish, and he's in Our Lady of Guadalupe parish. Yeah,
no, he's a great guy. The one I mean, there's so many. We could spend 2 hours going through your guests because such great people. But the one that we lost, Rich Clark, obviously. Dear friend of mine. The reason I'm doing this work is because of Rich. He was starting Cristo Rey Cleveland when I was in business, hating every day of it, and he introduced me to Cristo Rey, and life's never been the same. And
that's just mentioning that, that brings me back a year, because it was about a year ago, this time when I recorded my interview with him. And he was going to be the first one of the season. I'd heard about him. I had him on my queue for like 3 or 4 years. Finally reached out. He was great. We had this great conversation. And before it ran, he died. Yeah. And it was like, and I mean, there is kind of a list there. There's about 5 of my guests have passed away, which is, yeah, it's really, and so like just a few weeks ago, Father James F. Keenan died. And when I first heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, Jim Keenan died. Add him to the list. And my wife's like, what list? I'm like, guess who've died? And then I realized, oh, that's not him. Jim Keenan is still alive, the theologian. Sorry, Jim, to bring you up in this context. He was a great guest. Oh, I've had him on a couple of times, but Gene Mers. Did you know Gene from Milwaukee?
Wisconsin Province guy, yeah.
I mean, that interview, that's actually one of my all-time most downloaded interviews, because people he's so wonderful. He just talks about his own struggles with cancer, his own but just talking about what Ignatian spirituality, because he has such a way of putting things into perspective. And then he died like 4 months later. Yeah. It seems like a lot of Milwaukee people now that I think about it, but I don't know why I hate Milwaukee. I'm just kidding. Okay. We should tell people how Rob and I, why don't you tell the story of how we met?
Well, I didn't remember it.
Oh yeah, that's true. So when I was in, so I was one of those punk kids I reference, smart kids who have too much energy and too many ideas. I was at Creighton Prep. I came up with the idea of having a student council exchange. And the idea being that we would go, and this would give us an excuse to go and visit other Jesuit high schools. So we went to Kansas City, Rockhurst Prep, and we went to Marquette High. Each time we would have to spend the night, and we would be matched up with someone and when I went to Milwaukee, I got matched up with this weird kid named Rob Birdsell. And the name just always stuck in my mind. Birdsell. It just is a name that you can't forget.
No, it's a blessing. I mean,
And
right?
so I never talked to Rob after that. But I don't know. I think what happened was when I was in Tacoma and trying to raise money and looking at foundations, all of a sudden your name popped up in something, and I was like, Rob Birdsell. That sounds like the guy stayed with at Marquette, and before you knew it, yep, that's him. And I think maybe John Erickson, maybe I asked him and he confirmed it. I don't know. No, that would have come later. But yeah, we've been able to connect and we've been able to stay in touch. And it's like a movie. It's so amazing.
No,
A Disney movie. It's a Disney
I think
movie.
we reconnected in person at NCEA one year.
Yeah, that's probably right.
And
All right.
10 years ago.
So what else you up to? What else you up to this year? Is this the big thing? This is your big thing.
Well, I'm excited about, but I think the biggest news is we're empty nesters.
Yeah.
So like, holy cow, Tim, this is a wild one.
Because your youngest, they all went to Minnesota, right?
Correct. Good memory. My youngest is a freshman there. She moved up June 3rd. She's playing soccer there, so she had to spend the summer up there.
And how many? When are you going up there to visit her?
I was up there last weekend. I'm moving my middle one in this weekend, and then we'll go up Labor Day weekend since both their kids are there. So we'll be up there quite a bit. But the summer, the freedom, we could just travel. My wife and she came on a work trip with me, which was amazing, out to San Diego to see our friend Erin Barisano and her principals, and went to Baltimore, DC. She'd never been to DC and stayed with friends there. So it's kind of freeing. It's been that's the big news here at the Birdsell household. We're empty nesters.
Do you so you're kind of still new to this though, right? I mean, you're only a few weeks into it.
June 3rd, they were all gone.
Okay. All right.
Now our second came home. She was a counselor in an autism camp in Colorado all summer, and moved her back to Minnesota this weekend. So they kind of come and go through the summer, but as of this weekend, it'll be empty till Thanksgiving.
I mean, there's just going to be a lot of focus on each other, and that isn't necessarily always a good thing, Rob.
Well, I'm excited for it.
Okay, good.
I'm excited. We we've got the dog, and we like to travel, and like you, we like to garden, and this is big gardening time for the next few months.
Yeah.
Good. How about your kids?
15, 14, and 11. So we got 2 in high school this fall. Both
You're the
going
opposite
through
of
volleyball
us. You're moving in every which way.
Every which way. I mean, every which way. Fortunately, my boss, well, it's me, but gives me flexibility to go and pick up this and pick up that, because my wife is also, like she's coaching this fall. So it's like she's coaching as well as full-time gig at the high school. So yeah, there's gonna be a lot of demands on our time, but it's all good, man. It's all good. This is
so on a Saturday afternoon when I'm sitting in the backyard having a lemonade, I'll just shoot you a text and you'll be in your minivan running all over Buffalo.
I'll be at a volleyball tournament probably, or dropping off a volleyball tournament, or yeah, that's probably odds are I'll be at a volleyball something, which is okay. I don't mind volleyball. There's worse sports to watch, that's for sure.
No, it's exciting. I mean, the one I could not have done was swimming.
Yeah.
That would have been a tough one. sorry to all the swimmers that are listening, but actually our best friend, she swims in Virginia, but I, I'll text
Yeah,
her from the soccer field.
soccer is nice to be outside, but the parents would drive you crazy. They drove me crazy. Like even though from time to time I became one of those parents. Like I have this memory of going to a tournament, and on Saturday there was a soccer game with a certain ref, and it was a high school ref, and he was just garbage, right? He just couldn't call anything right, and it didn't cost us the game. He was just bad, right? And so the next morning, my wife comes, and as they're warming up, that ref comes out, and I was like, oh man, it's that same ref we had yesterday. I mean, he's just garbage. And so this girl turns around and she goes, I'll have you know that's my brother. And I was like, I'm not going to argue with a young girl about her older brother, but I was like, that was pretty, I shouldn't have said that out loud. But you become that as a soccer parent because you're just right there, right? You feel like, and then, but all of the soccer parents feel like they should be yelling about everything. So
at this stage, this past weekend, it was Parents Weekend for the soccer team up in Minnesota, and the pretty good parents. We had a good tailgate, about 200 people, and an all-female coaching staff, which is pretty remarkable. They should have more of that in women's soccer at that level.
Yeah.
All right, wait. Before we end here, give me a precursor. You don't have to name names, but what are you excited about with this season's podcast for Catholic School Matters? For the listeners,
I think I think we're going to do at least 5 of these podcasts with about controversies. So it's really going to be about leadership and kind of what's going on in and around Catholic schools. I think people are there's kind of a learned helplessness right now with some of the controversies about things, and they're just like, oh my gosh, I just don't want the noise and I don't know what to do, and so people just stay away. And I feel like, no, you need to have a few principles to be able to wade in so that you can deal with some of these things and not get blown away.
And will you do those 5, sort of that longer 50-minute with someone, and then a follow-up on all 5 of those?
Probably. I'll probably I won't run those consecutively because it's going to take a little time to build the reflections and things in. So like, I think the first one's going to run maybe September 11th. And then maybe it won't, maybe I'll just do the next one in October. I don't know, maybe every few weeks. I don't know. We'll see. That's kind of my main thing right now. And, I tend to break my podcast up. So I'll do a flurry of activity and do maybe 10. And then I'll take a break, and then I'll do 10 more, and I'll come up with a different idea. What about you? What do you got coming?
I'm excited for a new co-host. Nico Anderson is a colleague of mine at Hudson Global Scholars Catholic Virtual, and he's a young guy, 3-4 years out of UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago. So I think he'll bring a different perspective.
And you'll be able to understand him, unlike your previous co-host with that accent.
Burnford was tough. That's why we needed video so you could read his lips.
Subtitles.
No, Nico, I think will bring a good. He listened to 2 seasons, and he's in Catholic education, so he's. But I'm excited for his perspective and getting a young person. He's 25, 26 perspective on the conversation. Got one of our friends, Kent Hickey, coming on talking about spiritual leadership. Will be fun with Kent. I mentioned it earlier, but Jason Gay from the Wall Street Journal talking about participation in youth sports and its decline, especially among low-income families, and excited to dig into that. We did one in season 1 around that, so I'm excited to come back to that.
Here's the thing you want to bring. So you want to write this down. Okay, here's my contribution to your youth sports one. I was talking to the president of a small Catholic college, and I was amazed at how many sports they had. And I was like, how do you have this many sports for a school this small? And he said, the dirty little secret is sports are the one reason that parents will gladly fill out a tuition check. So what he means is they don't give scholarships, or they don't give enough scholarships, but parents will pay full freight if their kid can play soccer or basketball or whatever. So that's why such a large percentage of their student body are athletes. It's because the parents are like, well, we want to give them that chance to be a soccer player or whatever. Isn't that amazing?
But doesn't surprise me. I know St. Mary's of Moraga, the LaSallian school outside of the Bay Area,
Yeah.
80% of their students are athletes.
Yeah.
80%.
So but the thing is that people think, well, it's the hope of having an athletic scholarship that drives these parents to make all this commitment to youth sports and travel squads. And I'm on this other end going, no, it's not scholarships. It's just being able to play in college. If you've got the means, you'll write the check so that they can be on the team. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I've seen it with our oldest is now 20, 23, 24. And she had a lot of her classmates, teammates went D3.
Yeah.
But they went to good schools, but those are big checks. And yeah, it's
I've got a potential guest. I'm working with a publicist. So I never really know with publicists if things are going to come about, but Rachel Swarms wrote this book called The 272 about the 272 slaves sold by Georgetown.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's a phenomenal book. It'd be, I remember when the article came out in the New York Times. So she basically followed up and did research on actual lineages and people and realities. And so I reached out to her, and her publicist said she's interested in coming on the podcast. So if she does, that's great. I mean, I do this from time to time. I'll have an author on just to talk about a book. And it's not because they contact me like, hey, I've got this new book. Would you like to do it? It's more like I read the book and go, oh, this is cool. I want to bring this to my listeners. So I'm hoping that comes about. I just never know.
That'd be cool. That'd be
I've gotten to this point with a number of publicists, and it sounds promising, and then poof. You're like, what happened? Yeah. You get ghosted.
Yeah.
But that's all right. I mean,
I think the focus for the next class will be around the spiritual leadership outside of the onesie twosies, like a Jason Gay. That's not going to be about that. But with Kent kicking it off, and I think there's a yearning for that. And I think there's some great people that have viewpoints on this. So I think that'll be a fun theme for the year to weave in.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, since you've never listened to my podcast, you don't know what's coming. So I'm going to really get to surprise you. See, most of my guests did their homework and they're ready for this one. So I end every podcast with the same question. I ask all of our guests, who is your favorite teacher and why? And some of their answers are amazing, by the way.
I would assume you mean like a teacher that I've had, as opposed to like a teacher that worked for me.
Anything. Your favorite teacher and why. So like Jeb Bush, he said his mother, Barbara Bush, which was pretty cool hearing him talk about his mom.
I mean, should I say Jesus? Isn't that
that's been two
people
two
said
Catholic
that.
school presidents have said that. Yep. Baba Beta Marco, president of Red Bank Catholic. And I was like, wow, how did you top that one? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, if you can have 3 people for dinner, you always got to play the Jesus card and people are impressed. Favorite teacher. I've got a teacher who I worked with down in Louisiana. She was an art teacher, Janine Wellman, and she's still doing it. And she is, and I will say this because if she's actually listening, she will laugh hysterically. She was then, and she still is as old as dirt. And but she's still putting in the time because she loves to teach. And she still reaches out. One of the nice things about the newsletter and the email list I've built up over the years is that I still send it to people that I haven't seen in years. And so she will respond from time to time and will say, hey kiddo, great to see this, and send me a picture of the kids, and then it's how much they've grown. So it's people like that who I've had the privilege to work with. I'm now so old that I can't really remember even the names of the people that I took classes from, but it's people I've had a chance to work with. It's the dedication, it's the time, and it's, you do get the sense that they're probably at an age where they could retire, but they don't want to.
Hmm.
And it's not because they they have to keep working. It's because they enjoy doing what they're doing and it isn't work, And wouldn't that be great? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you'd like to be back in the classroom. I've also imagined, my career being a bit like a bell curve, and then at the end, going back and teaching and coaching again. I said this in the spring, and there was a retired person who was like, "I think you're forgetting how much work teaching is."
Oh, it's the hardest job I ever had.
And I was like, "Well, that could be true. Yeah, maybe it is the grass is greener kind of thing." But I still imagine like myself just going back and being, for the last few years. But who knows?
Yeah. Great. Well, Tim, thanks for being a guest on the next class.
This is fun, Rob.
You gotta say the same thing.
Hey, thanks for coming on the show. The check is in the mail. That I sent a check to all of my guests. Royalties will continue to pour in over time. Look forward to seeing you in October, huh?
Yeah, Lone Rocket will be a great one. So no, thanks for what you're doing, Tim. It's great stuff. I love getting your newsletter. You've had great guests on. I mean, we could literally go. You've had some great. I've got a whole list here I was going to talk to you about, but there are more important subjects.
All right, Rob Birdsell. Thanks very much.
Timul, thank you.